Okay, let's get started. I'd like to call to order the Monday, January 28th study session of Littleton Planning Commission. We do not need to take a roll call. Attorney Steve will be late. He's got car trouble. Maybe he's walking. I'm not sure. Also, our new interim community development director, Jennifer Henninger, this is her last meeting of the Sheridan City Council, so she will not be here tonight. I hear from the grapevine she is looking forward to meeting us, and she will be here our next meeting in February. We only have one topic tonight, study session topic, ID number 19-019. We'll get through this. Preliminary project plan process, otherwise known as P4, for Delaware and Powers development located on the 8.8 acre property at the northeast corner of South Delaware Street and West Powers Avenue, Littleton, Colorado. I'm sure you'll mention it, but I'll beat you to it a little bit. This is an informal presentation. If you want, go ahead and ask questions during staff's presentation. And then we can have some summaries if you want after the presentation is completed. The applicant can be here, but he's not allowed to speak. We also do not take citizen comments. If down the road that the developer wishes to go to a full-bore meeting, it will be a public meeting. It'll go before Planning Commission, and then we are advisory to City Council. We'll take testimony, and we'll also allow public comment. So, with that introduction, take her away.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So as you mentioned, this is the Delaware and Powers Project Preliminary Project Plan Process. The applicants are Richmond American Homes and Redland. I recently realized that I mix those two up a lot more often than I realized, so I apologize. But as you stated, this is the P4. This is a P4 application. So staff will go through a presentation. Feel free to interrupt at any time. You can raise your hand, shout at me, or just jump in. I'll try to make notes to pause at the end of each slide to make sure that anyone has an opportunity to speak. Through this discussion, you'll provide your informal, non-binding input and feedback to the applicant. The applicant is here, but they will not be able to speak or answer questions. The applicant's already come in for a pre-application conference with city staff. They elected to go through the P4 application in order to get this feedback from you, and then subsequently the City Council. Following this process, there's the formal application processes for the general plan, development plan, and then any final development proposals. So this is the general zoning of the property in the surrounding area. It's an 8.8 acre parcel. There are some documents in here that say 8.58, so we would make sure to iron that out through the formal development process, but most of the application material say 8.8. In any case, the proposals for 99 proposed single-family dwellings. This comes to about 11.25 dwellings per acre. The current zoning is IP, or industrial park, on the western half of the property. The eastern portion of the property is also zoned IP, but has a PDO. That PDO allows specifically for mini storage, mini warehousing. So if there were any use beyond that mini storage, mini warehousing on the eastern portion of the property, they would have to remove that PDO. Just want to be very clear on the change in the uses. The concept as it is currently shows just single-family residential. The property is surrounded by a mix of zoning and uses, immediately surrounded by R5 and IP. R5 is medium to high residential or multifamily residential. As you get further around or out from the property, particularly going west and south, you get into some single-family zoning and single-family development as well. The property to the north is the Norgren or IMI property. They develop a number of small and large industrial products. So this is a detailed view of the site plan concept. Again, 99 single-family detached homes. Each one is on their individual lots. There are large open space tracts that surround these individual lots. Each individual lot will have a garage underneath, the residential areas on the first floor, second floor, and third floor with rooftop decks above. There's a fourth floor area, but that's only for, as proposed in the concept, only for their stairway to access the rooftop deck. The parking is being all provided for the code requirements within the units, and then there's additional parking being provided on the street shown on this plan.
Couple questions, Rob.
Of course.
What size are the lots?
So the lots, it says they're 26 by 50 or 28 by 50, so they're two different size lots, and I'm not sure whether they alternate, but approximately that same size. So
Probably because of there's a minimum of 3-foot distance between the unit and a property line in order to have windows in that side
right.
property line.
Right, so yeah, between fire ratings and those things are really driving the setbacks. They do have individual lots. There would be some amount of open space provided on the individual lots, but the majority of the required open space for the PDR zone district would be provided in the larger open space tracts.
So a question on the parking.
Yes.
They show parking spaces, but is that, there's just sets of 3 throughout, which is less than the total number they said. So is it to be assumed that they need parking along that whole area, not just where those 3s are, or what?
That's correct. So the 3s on the inside, that's a private street that they're proposing. And then they're also showing spaces that might be more difficult to see along South Bannock, and then West Powers and South Delaware. And then in addition to those, then there's 2 spaces that load into the bottom floor of each unit as well.
Okay, so on their actual property, there's only the 24 extra based on the 8 by 3. So the rest of their parking is actually street parking from the other roads around.
That's correct.
And if one would drive by there, those spots are always taken up by the apartments to the south.
Or by Teslas right now.
Which are going to be kicked off, I guess. Thanks for the asphalt. Can you just rattle off, since you talked about the zoning, R5 zoning, could you rattle off what are since we're surrounded on 3 sides by R5, could you tell us what the standards are for heights, setbacks, et cetera, for the R5?
Density. Yeah, density too, please.
Density too, yes. I think it's 43 something units per acre, I think, for R5.
So the, let's see here. The R5 residential allows for 43.56 units per acre. The maximum height is 30 feet. The unobstructed open space requirement is 25%. So on this site would be provided 50 is required by the PDR zone district. That's not something that can be altered by the plan development zoning. The width at front setback is 60 feet, so that would be more important if they were individual units. Front setback is 20 feet, rear setback 20 feet, 15 feet combined on the sides, 10 feet for a corner lot on the side. So in one of the, to kind of add on to what you were saying, the height for the proposed development would be 35 feet and 42 feet. So the 42 feet would be the maximum. So that would be the 4th floor where you have the walk-up portal to the rooftop deck, and the 35 feet as proposed would be the rest of the structure there. Did I hit the components that you wanted to hear on the R5?
Well, I was going to ask about floor area ratio. I didn't see it in here. Doesn't mean it wasn't in there. I may just have missed it. But what is it for the proposal versus the R5? Out of curiosity.
That's a good question. So we haven't done that. So the way that the the code works for residential zone districts, it doesn't look at RFA. I'm sure you could do the calculation and figure out what it is and do that comparison, but SAT hasn't done that analysis.
Restrictions of the height and the setbacks and the maximum floor coverage or site coverage, et cetera.
Right. And then the number of dwelling units is also the big component limiting. And so the other surrounding R5 zone properties that directly across from the subject property are primarily 2.5 to 3 story apartment buildings and condos.
Another question, Rob.
Of course.
So as we just did the floodplain exemption for that,
Yes.
and one of the things that they showed was that the property was going to be up to about the size of the fence. How is that working out for this?
So we didn't look at a detailed grading or utilities plan. On the cross-section that we have with the application materials, there is some rise. So I don't know if that's all being added through this, or does that answer your
I
question?
mean, that's from what we had seen there before, you're talking a substantial, now you're talking about buildings being up a lot higher too than the ones around them too, plus you've got the elevation for the floodplain. So I'm wondering about how that towering effect is going to be over the 2.5 stories on the other side.
And that's a good comment. And the height would be measured from the finished grade. So from where that grade would be after the subdivision, or excuse me, after the work in the floodplain would be done at that grade, then the height would be measured from there rather than what it is now.
And we had heard in that meeting on the special, or use by special exemptions, that was a concern. So we'd make that very clear if the case moves forward, how that looks, and probably get some cross sections of that area so you can get a better understanding for how that looks. But I think the applicant also heard in that meeting that you were concerned about that 6-foot rise, or the berm that would be on that corner. So we'll try and work with the applicant if it moves forward to minimize that as much as we can.
I mean, because if you think about it, if you're looking at 42, 43 feet for the stairs up there, and then you've got this 5-foot berm on top of it,
right.
And then you've got on the other side 2.5-story buildings. I mean, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
In the application materials, I guess it's page 2 of 6, it talks about existing zoning, 25-foot setback to non-industrial use. I get that that's an IP zone. In the proposed zoning, the setbacks are 1 foot front, 1 foot side end unit, 3 foot side internal unit, 8 foot rear alley, 15 foot perimeter property. That doesn't sound like what you were describing when you were reading. Maybe those are the R5 setbacks you were given before, but it seemed like those were a lot bigger. What is the fact that we've got quote unquote 99 single family units here? How does that obviate whatever the zoning setbacks are in an R5, relatively speaking? If we were, would you say 20 foot or something?
That's correct, yeah, 20 feet on the front and rear. And then between the sides, it's 5 and 10, depending on whether it's north, southeast, or west.
And these, I'm just asking, I'm not, providing an opinion, more or less, but I mean, if that's the neighborhood and those are single family comps, because there's obviously a lot of apartments in this neighborhood, how do you reconcile 1 foot front setback with 20 foot front setback for other single families on Delaware? Or does it need to be reconciled?
And I'm not going to answer to whether or not it needs to be reconciled. But what the applicant did do is they provide open space. There's the kind of common space tracks. I'm going to flip to the next slide, but we can definitely move back. So this slide in the lighter green color are the open space, the common open space areas. So as you can see, the dark green areas are very small, so they're very compact lots, and the separation between the structures on those lots and their property lines are very small. Of course, when you're looking at the distance between these individual units that are internal to the development, there's a very small setback. But if you look at the setback from the units that are being proposed here to the adjacent right-of-ways, West Powers or South Bannock, that actual separation is closer to the tune of 50 feet because of that open space that's being provided. So I have about, and I've scribbled these down because I knew I wouldn't have a scale and be measuring this out here. 50 feet from Powers, about 30 feet from Bannock, and this is from the residences to the right-of-way line, and about 40 feet to Delaware. So there's a little bit more setback there that's provided through the open space.
All right, essentially though, that's rear setback, is it not? Because the front setback's going to be, I assume, bordering whatever the streetscape is there, correct?
That's another great point to bring up. So there's a private street that runs, it's that kind of L-shaped street from West Powers and bends over to South Bannock Street. And then beyond that, the narrower rights of way are alleys. They're about 22 feet wide.
Okay.
So it's a good question on where the front setback would be measured to, because right now the way our code reads, the front setback is to a right-of-way. So if that's not a dedicated right-of-way, we would have to figure out how we would interpret that. But the design of the structures, and if I can flip to the next slide, again, happy to flip back in a second, is they're designed to look as if they face out. So this is what would face West Powers or South Bannock and South Delaware, and then the backs of these units, which might end up being the front, depending on the interpretation, would be the garage that fronts those alleys. So
how did we? This is Richmond American did Littleton Village, did they not? So I mean, this is essentially a comparable design.
It's there, yeah.
Yeah, is it the same sort of orientations we were dealing with there? I know I assume that was was that a PDR or was that a?
It is PDR. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't think the orientation with the lot size is exactly the same. There might be some different setup and setbacks and things, but I believe the cityscape product is the same thing that's there.
Okay.
Go ahead. Just a question about zoning. So I know why the strategy of the PDR? I mean, they're asking for something, right? I mean, so what are they seeking relief on?
So a large driver for the applicant to move forward with the PDR is the height. I think there might have been some other factors there, but the kind of final piece that really couldn't be resolved within any of the straight zone districts was the height.
Probably the lot size too, and 50% open space per lot size if you're doing a residential home.
That's right.
So there's some substantial changes between, if you went even down to, the R3 per se, into single family homes, there's a huge difference in lot size, the height, and the setbacks.
That's correct. And the PDR allows the applicant to kind of move all that open space into a common area rather than having it on each individual lot.
Seems like a lot of the open space is that a detention pond?
It is.
So it's not much usable for them other than a walkway around it would appear.
That's correct.
Well, normally it'll be empty. Mm-hmm. And take the dogs down there if you want.
Is that pond the existing pond that's on that site?
No.
Proposed detention?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm looking to you anyway.
I think that is on the site to the north.
To the north.
Yeah, and is used for the industrial development.
So this will be a new detention.
That's correct.
Has there been a fire department buy-in on the turn radius and configuration of the proposed developments?
So they reviewed the proposed development. I believe they worked with the applicant on this design, and there are certain lengths of these dead ends and things and turn radiuses that they looked at. I can't say whether or not they approved this final design. They didn't review this P4 application and get back to us, but I believe they were consulted. They were at the original pre-application meeting as well. So they would absolutely review, and they might have additional comments at the time of that formal technical review.
I was reviewing the comp plan on the Progress Park neighborhood and some goals and policies in there. One of them says traffic impact, protecting protecting neighborhoods from the negative impacts of unnecessary traffic congestion. So I understand the applicant said they're going to do a traffic study, so that will suss out some of that.
That's correct.
Information. In the transportation section of Progress Park neighborhood information policy 3, it talks about a traffic light at Powers and Bannock. And will this development trigger that light?
It could. I think that, and not saying that, I'm not sure, we haven't looked at it, but I think, the traffic study will definitely be required as part of the formal application. And that's exactly the kind of improvement that, the larger traffic impact could trigger.
Sure. And then just other things that said, limit new high-density residential encroachment of commercial and industrial development into existing residential areas. And it's not really residential, but I guess it's industrial now. But, so staff will look at the comp plan goals and kind of evaluate those as well.
We will as well, and that's
Sure.
absolutely something for you to base your discussion and decision on as well.
Well, we're not deciding anything. We're
Not today.
Well, for talking
non-binding, as you say.
If we're talking about the neighborhood plan, I'd like to throw out some comments on that. For the neighborhood goals, it says preserve the existing character of the neighborhood as much as possible. I have a hard time seeing this as preserving the existing character of the neighborhood. I mean, they're beautiful buildings, don't get me wrong. It's a lovely building, but it's not the character of the neighborhood so much. It also talks about limiting new high-density residential development into existing residential areas. Now, I don't consider this per se high density, but it is intense, it is mass, and its scale throws it into the area where it looks, has the look of high density. So I'm not so sure it fits some of the neighborhood goals in that matter. For land use, the Progress Park residents desire to preserve the low-density residential character of the neighborhood. That's saying the same thing again, the scale and mass and adding height to it and having practically no setbacks. I mean, when Littleton Village was being built, I know when I first went by it, looking at the cityscape there, I thought it was one big building until, you're in front of it, and then you can see that they're separate homes. But that has the appearance of one huge building unless you're looking at it more direct on. So there's definitely some concerns with massing and the scale and the intensity. Policy 2, the neighborhood land use policy for Progress Park proposes that the existing zoning boundaries not be changed except as it might reduce the potential intensity of development in the neighborhood. I don't think this fits that per se. So I have some serious concerns about what the Progress Park neighborhood part of our comp plan says versus what this is presenting. I mean, again, beautiful buildings, but not necessarily the right place for them.
Well, that'll bring up an interesting discussion. There's the neighborhood plan goals and objectives. There's also existing zoning, which is the industrial zoning. Could you rattle off what is allowed in the industrial zone
I can
as a comparison to what they're asking for here?
Sure, I can call a couple things out. It's definitely when staff is reviewing a zoning change like this, we look at, well, this property now is currently mostly, vacant. So there's some parking lot on one side, but, we look at what could be allowed. And in this case, it's everything from commercial cleaning and laundry operations, assembly of prefabricated parts, fabrication by stamping, cutting, or otherwise shaping processed materials into useful products. Some of the institutional uses, childcare and so forth. All of the commercial uses that are allowed in the commercial districts are allowed in IP. So IP is the lightest of the 3 industrial zone districts that the city has, IP, I1, and I2. So it doesn't allow for the heaviest industrial uses, so the manufacturing of raw goods and so forth, but it does allow for that additional fabrication.
What about floor area ratios, heights, setbacks?
So I believe I'm in the...
Chapter 2?
Yes, thank you. And this will just be for the western half of the property. The eastern half of the property has very specific requirements on how it would have to be developed. but unobstructed open space in an IP zone district is 20%. So this PDR would be an increase on that requirement. There are some added unobstructed open spaces along property lines that abut residential zone districts. But there is no maximum height requirement, or limitation rather, and no limit to the floor area ratio that could be allowed on this property as it's zoned currently.
I'm sorry, did you say no floor area ratio?
Wait, which one?
No floor area ratio limitation and no height limitation in the IP zone district.
What's its present, it's I what?
IP.
So I'm looking at IP, and it says the FAR is 2-to-1.
Maybe my code is dated.
I'm looking at the website, so
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
look on the website too.
Yeah.
it's 2-to-1.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, unlimited floor area seems to be, yeah, it can't be. You read 2-to-1?
Yeah, according to the website, it's 2-to-1. That is all I can
Dangerous
say.
now with my old code.
Well, you got a
I know there's been a lot
1922
of
zoning
changes,
code there?
so.
Yes, it is 2-to-1, that is correct.
Would you, let's see, are there any maximum
there's no
height?
height.
Still no maximum height?
Yeah, no maximum
So
height.
they could have 16 acres of buildings theoretically or something.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwarzbacher, for correcting that.
When I hear
Just
those,
wanted to make sure I was on the same
yeah,
page when you
no,
said that.
I appreciate
Oh,
that.
wait. Yeah. Did I look at something wrong?
when I hear those goals from the neighborhood plan, and I visit the site and look at the neighborhood, there's a disconnect to me there. I think this is a vast improvement over what's there now. And the scale of the neighborhood actually opposite this, at least on Powers and Bannock, are multifamily, high-density apartment complexes. They're kind of dated. So I wonder if the description's really old, I think, from the neighborhood plan. It's not been updated.
Can't disagree with that, but it is what it is, and it's what we have right now.
Well, yeah, of course, the neighborhood plan is much larger than just this one little area. But it is interesting sometimes that neighborhood plans conflict with existing zoning and existing zoning laws and uses by right. Heights, setbacks, etc.
Yeah, and just on that.
Yep.
Policy number 2 in Progress Park, I mean, it talks about intensity and wanting to preserve the existing single-family neighborhoods. Well, what's surrounding this is not existing single-family, it's existing multifamily. And I think of intensity, sort of the hierarchy of uses, starting with most intense being heavy industrial, moving to light industrial, to commercial, to multifamily residential, to townhomes, to single-family. So in terms of the spectrum of intensity, this is on the low end of intensity. Now, these buildings are definitely taller than what's surrounding them, or as proposed, but that may also reflect the character of development nowadays. Nowadays, a single-family home, it's not acceptable to be able to touch the ceiling with your hand, which is the case in my 1952 home. So, I see this as, yes, being taller than some of the surrounding structures, but density-wise, it's much lower and has great access to Powers Park, which also features a large detention pond as open space.
There was a question about the functionality of the open space and the fact that a good part of it's in the detention area. I was wondering, and maybe it's an ongoing question, is what types of amenities they're going to be providing for the 99 units. I'm sure there'll be some families there. Is there a playground proposed? Or I see a pocket park, but it doesn't really describe what might be in that. Or, maybe they can contribute to one of the other local parks like Promise Park or Powers Park that maybe need some new facilities to accommodate these residents.
Let's talk about the park. I have 2 concerns. One of them I think can be solved fairly easily. The access off of Powers that goes north and then heads to the east. That northbound road is in the wrong location. You basically split your park. You've got a kind of a no man's land on the east side facing 7 or 8 units. On the northwest side, you've got that gazebo with a very small area. Just move that access road to the east, concentrating the park area where the gazebo is. It'd be a very simple change to make. If you lose one one unit on the corner where you make that sharp turn, you go ahead and put it on the south end, so you don't lose any units, but you concentrate your green space to make it more usable for the residents.
I think that you're on the right track there, Mark. Even to eliminate that curved road coming up from Powers as it heads over to Bannock, and then each group, there's basically two groups of residential units. One would have an access from Bannock, and the other one would have an access coming up from Powers and then turning right into its unit. Then you basically doubled your open space. And if the fire department required a throughput, you can put those masonry units that allow grass to grow up through them. Still a park-like structure, looks green, and those can be designed for heavy wheel load of a fire truck to go through if that was a fire thing. And that would really open up that center and make it more of an amenity to the development.
Well, since we're firing away, my second concern, well, I'll start with the good part. Happy that I'm looking at single-family residential and not, I'm sorry, my friend, I'm going to say this, cell block 17 apartment units, nondescript. We're looking at single-family for-sale housing, which I think is a very good thing. So I'm willing to stretch a little bit here and there on, let's say, setbacks. Setbacks don't concern me along the front and the rear. Because, again, the open space that's available at the perimeters and along the park areas. So I'm going to bend, but one of my concerns is the height. Developers all the time in the past have said, well, this is our template, and we have to do it this way. And planning commissions in the past have said, that's nice, but here are our standards. You have your template, we have our standards. Guess who's going to win? I think they're asking for what, 35 feet for 3 stories plus the extra height for the access to the roof. In my mind, 10 foot per floor isn't a reasonable amount. That could, from floor to floor dimension, that's 30 feet. That would whack off 5 feet on the height of these buildings. I think these stairwell masses to the third level are quite abrupt, and especially when you have 6 feet between units and you've got that little sliver with a 43-foot building on either side, to me is quite obnoxious, put it that way. I think things can be done to mitigate that. I would suggest that the developer look at doing so. I think the height can be brought down. And again, I'm willing to concede some height for getting the single-family house versus the nondescript apartment buildings.
Or the open storage previously proposed.
Which previous planning commission approved, along with council.
Yeah, this is a vast improvement.
So, can I say some stuff about the architecture? Sorry.
By the way, the architecture is fair game. This is the PDO and architecture.
So I know Cityscape is a product of Richmond homes, but I guess I kind of look at it as it's cookie cutter. And so, I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other developments that have this exact same product. So why is this uniquely Littleton? And you know, is what's good in Broomfield good here? Is what's good in Castle Rock good here? You know, maybe the architecture, the materials need to, at a minimum, respond to the context. I mean, there's brick buildings out there, not stone, and funny little chintzy stone and big scale stone. I mean, let the context inspire you. Rather than some of this stuff, it's not uniquely Littleton, I guess is what I'm saying. It's being built in other places, one after another. So
My concern along those lines was more about the diversity, that there's 99 units and there's a limited number of variations in those. And at Littleton Village, I think it works okay because there's not as many, and they're clustered in an area, and then there's other products nearby. Here, I'm just nervous that it's going to be too much of the same. The height doesn't bother me as much, except where they do need to build up to be above the floodplain, where that lower floor elevation has to probably be 3 feet above the street, so then you're another,
more like 4 or 5 or 6
or whatever it needs to be. That corner of, I think it's Delaware and Powers, is going to have some pretty high structure for it.
Well, they do have, it looks like a template to have 3 stories without the deck up there. Maybe that's where you would concentrate that to keep the heights low.
Right. The other thing I was looking at too is you have 30-foot setbacks from the right-of-way on the typical cross-section, at least, from the street, which is a great improvement of the chain link and the overhead electric wires that are there now. But I'm thinking it's actually more than you really need there. It looked like the cross-section 25 would be adequate, right there. But I'm wondering if maybe they need that distance to make up that grade that you were referring to before with the 6-foot berm and, on that corner especially. I imagine to get up 4 or 5 feet above the street, you're going to need at least horizontal distance there.
I felt like too, looking at the product, and then I went back and looked at the neighborhood plan, which I also failed to see how that really relates that much to this particular area, but it is what it is. Anyway, I believe I read that there needs to be some kind of step back, from the property line with the building itself, and just basically saying the same thing, that you're faced with this very tall, skinny mass with very small setbacks from the street. So visually, I'm not sure that's in line with the neighborhood, frankly. And I agree, there's a lot of things that can be done in the neighborhood. It is a changing neighborhood, but that is concerning to me as well. And also, by the way, just one more comment, I am happy to see that it is single family, because I feel like, we have not had as much of that. I haven't seen it since I've been on the commission. So it's refreshing in that sense. However, with the density and the way it's designed, it looks kind of like cell block 17, Mark. But, from a distance, it's really going to be hard to differentiate that.
They talk about single family. This is pretty much the most urban area of Littleton that we have. So I'm willing to concede that the single family residential can be different in character. It could be a little denser, maybe tighter together, smaller lots, but still with that 50% open space requirement. I can again concede a little bit more than your typical little 1,200 square foot bungalow or 2-story little slot house.
You look at the immediately adjacent R5, and it's just pretty much all paved. And so this is like a relief in that part of the neighborhood, somewhat, that the kids and probably adjacent those block type buildings are probably going to run across the street and come over there to play on the grass over here, unless they go down to Powers Park. So, or Powers Park, I guess it's called, just about 2 blocks down.
By the way, it was always my dream to acquire from Nordgren, city money. We have all the money we need and more, to acquire that pond area to the west of Nordgren. That would make a wonderful park right there, rather than covering it over, filling up the lake and covering it over with houses. It'd make a dandy park.
They'd probably be excited to sell it to us, I bet.
Yeah. Make it so, council.
Yeah, get rid of that obligation.
The lots in this proposed development, I believe the lot concept is a 0 lot line, so each unit would be built right on the lot line, and so there's yard that you have on one side of your unit, and then the other side of your unit is the other person's yard. And that works. It's done in Hawaii a lot. It makes for close neighbors, which, creates some issues on occasion. But I've seen similar type of development. That's what this is. It looks to be a zero lot line.
Yeah. Earlier, Bruce, you read Commissioner Stallman, you read the setbacks, correct? You had found them. I'm failing to find them right now. Are they in the narrative?
They're in the application material.
Well,
Page
they talk about, they have 26 by 50 lots and 28 by 50 lots. Building envelope is 22 by 41. That's the building envelope per site. So what that allows is that a non-corner type unit has 6 feet of space between units to be able to have windows.
I don't know, on page 2 of the zone, it's in the application materials. It's got the zoning table, existing zoning, proposed zoning, and setbacks, 1 foot front, 1 foot side, end unit, 3 foot side, internal unit.
Perfect, thank you. I've found it now, and I believe that 3 foot side internal unit in between the unit and each individual property line is there, and that's for to be able to have any degree of the openings on the walls.
Yeah, this is the 6 foot.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
So 6 foot both together, but I think each one would have 3 feet on either side rather than the zero lot line. Yeah, in order to allow some types of openings.
Yeah, because with the zero lot line, you have to get permission from your neighbor basically to paint the side of your house.
Right.
Also, there has to be a fire-rated wall, which allows almost no openings.
Less than 3 feet, you cannot have any opening, period.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't, there's no negotiation with the city or anybody. It's in the International Residential Code.
Yeah.
I agree with Mark and I'm sharing Robin's comments to apply. I think you were talking about the going the extra mile, if you will, because of the single-family housing product and giving a little bit extra to get something that's beneficial for the community. I had a couple maybe technical questions. One thing I'll say is I like the fact that as far as the infrastructure is concerned, they're talking about undergrounding the existing power lines. They've got pretty easy access to sanitary sewer and water and so forth. So I think these are advantageous for the project. What I wanted to ask, one thing I wanted to ask staff was, the applicant has prepared and submitted a use by special exception application to the city to start the process of removing the Slaughterhouse Gulch floodplain currently located at the southwest corner of the property. This is the grading issue, but hypothetically, if we grade up this property, the drainage way is still in place and there's still implications downstream of this location. Do we have a feeling regarding the implications of what that means as far as I use the phrase right of way for potential floodwaters moving towards the river?
So if I may take that one. So I was at the case that came to Planning Commission, a few weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, and
time flies.
Yeah, I know. It's been a heck of a 2 weeks. But basically, they would need to amend the floodplain map, and the Planning Commission did approve moving forward with that. This would not have any detrimental effects in our estimation of the downstream flows or the surrounding area. It was an interesting discussion at that meeting, but this is essentially a backwater area of the floodplain, and building that section up doesn't have any negative effects on the flow of water through that area because it is somewhat of a backwater. That area does fill up, but doesn't contribute a lot to the flow through the larger area. And correct me if I'm wrong, there, planning commissioners, but that's what I heard.
You're pretty well correct. I mean, they were talking about in the corner raising up approximately 6 feet. We requested, we weren't demanding, we requested that they look at that again and lower it as much as possible. But the intent is still to get the drainage towards the north to their holding pond and keep it away from Bowers and Delaware.
Okay. All right. Okay. And for the map you've got up there, the properties that actually border the Nordgren parking lot, there's a representation of some trees there, but I don't know if that is sufficient landscaping barrier kind of development. I'm not sure buying one of those properties sort of on the edge of the Nordgren parking lot there, you get a nice view of the manufacturing plant and the cars coming and going and so forth and so on. Are we likely to require anything a little bit more intense as far as landscaping obstructions to?
We can certainly look into that. I think it's a good comment. If the case moves forward, we can.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. The other one I wanted to ask was this. Code section 10-2-23 sub E3 talks about additional materials, and it says the following additional material is required to accompany the general PD plan. The applicant shall submit a statement of the terms and conditions under which subject property will be developed and maintained subsequent to development. Such statement shall include conditions, performance standards, and other such reasonable restrictions as may be necessary to ensure development and maintenance of the property in full accordance with the approved general PD plan. I trust that that hasn't been completed yet because we're not to that point.
That's correct. They haven't been able to submit any formal applications while this P4
of course
is in place. So,
but from staff standpoint and from the commission standpoint, what is our view of what needs to go into one of these types of additional materials, and in particular, given that we've had development by this particular group in the city, what is your sense of, generally speaking, what might be required?
So, did you want to?
I can start. I think it would, it could amount to anything as far as, a set of design guidelines or things like that we've seen and used in other parts of the city to, how the site is, the landscaping is maintained, and any of those other public areas. But I'm sure, that language is fairly open, and I think.
So you might interpret it as being sort of the public nature of the properties, open space and so forth and so on, as opposed to the performance standards of the individual units.
It might be able to serve that other purpose. It might be able to speak to the specifics of the individual units and maybe the construction of them. I don't know if Steve thinks otherwise, but I'm not sure. I haven't employed that in my history with the city.
Well, it's something to maybe noodle on.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
I'll bring up a minor point. Probably several of you maybe went over to Littleton Village to see their product there. I did. The alleyways were nothing but concrete. This plan does show, we'll see if they follow through, in more detailed plans, but it looks like it does show some landscaping green space going back to the alley. So the alley areas are not as dreary as the ones in Littleton Village.
brought up a comment about the building clusters, and I think it was a good comment. When I look at the two stretches of buildings along Delaware, the lot width is 26 feet-ish.
Yeah, they range there either
26 to 28, right? So 13 times 26. So that stretch along Delaware is 338 feet-ish of kind of building mass. I mean, these buildings are pretty close together, and I think Robin mentioned they kind of, they're pretty wall-like. So I guess I would ask, if would they consider potentially reducing the unit that's right by that. There's a little greenway that's going west towards Delaware, but that would connect through and connect to Delaware to break up that building mass. 338 feet is in comparison, a Denver City block is 266 feet by 400, so it's getting pretty big. And then also on, I guess it's Powers, just that other stretch of buildings there, if they're, a cluster of 5 or, more than a cluster of 6, just to kind of break it up a little bit and give a little permeability to the site.
That would also make it a more walkable road.
Yeah.
Because people would have to walk around a large road to get out to the street.
Things we've done before, it doesn't set up real well here though, but we'd have green streets. So you have the alley, then you have a green space, alley, green space. So the green space is a green street. So whether they would consider that or not, but you could link a green street north-south all the way to Powers in 2 places.
Good suggestions. I think that with a little massage, they could make up one of the 2 units somewhere else, or maybe even both of them.
Yeah, sir.
Just to tag on to those comments, I think that's a great suggestion about breaking up some of the massing. And there's sort of an opportunity just waiting there with that path that's shown just northwest of the gazebo feature. Could be punched through to Delaware, perhaps. And just to touch on materials, as Commissioner Miller mentioned, that the materials shown in the exhibits are not really reflective of what's the palette in the neighborhood. Just glancing at street view and from memories of going by this area, it's brick in this area. And maybe it's appropriate to use some other materials to avoid monotony, but it seems like brick would be a good thing to include. Yeah, I think that's...
I was going to ask one, maybe you can back up, of course, a couple, one more. Yeah, okay, that one's good either. That one there is fine. I think it's Littleton Prep or Littleton Academy is at the other corner of Bannock and it's not Rafferty, but it's down in that area. It's on the other side of Norgren.
That's correct. So on this, you see it labeled here, Littleton Prep. So
there you go.
Just to the north side of Norgren.
Right. So hypothetically, it wouldn't be unanticipated that these units would have school-age kids that could theoretically be walking to school. Do we envision, is there a need or an opportunity to do something that would make the travel from this property to Littleton Prep, you have to go right past Norgren as everybody's coming to work and everybody's going to school. Does the applicant have any thoughts about that kind of thing? Do we have any thoughts about how we're going to, make sure that pedestrian right-of-way is sort of top priority here?
I think we're always looking for places where the city can get additional right-of-way and detached sidewalks and that sort of thing. So from our end, I think we definitely are. From the applicant, there was nothing included in the application materials, but I think it's a valuable comment for them.
Okay. And we'll sure, if it moves forward, we'll definitely send it to Littleton Public Schools to give comments about that. So.
Okay. Great.
What's the solution, though? Tell Norgren they've got to rebuild their sidewalk and put in a detached sidewalk?
That's usually a tough solution. But we can look at different alternatives.
If we end up buying
whatever that means.
Well, I know there was money spent in this neighborhood over a number of years. The, what do we call it? The CBDG.
CBDG.
Yeah.
CDBG.
Redoing the sidewalks and widening them and so forth and so on. Community development block grants, yes.
If it's a low moderate income neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we'll check with Public Works too, if this moves forward, to see what the plan is for capital improvement projects related to those block grants.
Okay.
That type of thing.
That sounds good.
We kind of interrupted your.
I said we could. It's been all right.
I said, and boy, did you take advantage of that. No, these are great. This is wonderful comments. Hopefully, our applicant who's sitting over in the corner there are taking meticulous notes. Do you have anything else to add to your basic presentation?
I think for the most part, the discussion has kind of covered everything. I think there's a couple slides that we didn't quite look at in detail, but the main components of really what they showed. And you've had the application materials, and it sounds like you've all had time to take a look at them, so I won't belabor anything. But this demonstration here just kind of shows a isometric view of the comparison of the height of the proposed buildings, even though they're in white, with the surrounding adjacent multifamily development to the south. This is looking down Powers. And this is the cross section, which we talked about a couple times and was referenced and had up. So I don't think anything new here, unless anyone has any additional comments.
Well, go back one slide. Are those apartments? A lot of these apartments are South Metro housing. Are the ones on the other side of the street here? Are those South Metro housing?
I'm not sure.
I don't know the answer to that either.
Okay.
But we could check. We could also route it to Corey at South Metro and see if they've got any comments.
It might be. There might be advantages to them, and it'd be interesting to hear that if how they view something like this relative to. I know they've got properties on the east side of Bannock.
Right. Is that Corey Reitz?
Yes.
Correct? So I discussed with him, and he, seemed to be somewhat, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, in favor of the project. Thought you could even do higher density. So,
okay.
From their point of view, the more the better.
Okay.
Okay. Can we go into, perhaps anybody have any final comments, or do we have more technical questions? Seeing no technical questions, anybody else, anybody want to make a summary of their thoughts? Start there.
Sure, why not?
Former motion man.
So there's certainly been some discussion about the height feeling different than what's in the area, but I think the illustration of what the apartments look like nowadays shows what you can get inside a 30-foot height limit when you're trying to squeeze 3 stories in. You end up with a garden level apartment, low ceilings, and as you say, cell block looking buildings. So there's the opportunity with the height to do something that's a little different and that fits more with kind of modern expectations for ceiling height. The other thing with the height is they're proposing 35-foot ceiling heights for the main building. We already have approved a 35-foot 10 ceiling height for the PDO on the eastern portion of the site. That mini warehouse building was going to cover more than an acre with one massive 35-foot 10 building. So this is looking like an improvement over that in terms of breaking things up. And although some of the appurtenances will be taller, if they don't do every single one of them with a roof access, perhaps that is a way to limit the appearance of sameness. One thing that I would like to see if this does turn into an application is the dwelling unit per acre analysis for the surrounding areas. I mean, we know the zoning, but how dense are the surrounding areas in comparison to what's being proposed? Parking, feel free to just exclude anything about street parking. Powers and Bannock are already taken. This is on my 5K running route, and I've run those streets a lot. There are very few spaces available on those streets, if any. Would recommend, if this does come forward, looking at limiting turf as a way to promote low water use, although we are in Denver water, which has very low water rates. It would be good to see some xeriscape as opposed to just green lawns as depicted here. That's more realistic for our climate and would fit more with the state's long-term water plan. And on a couple positive notes, I like the illustration that they did showing the massing compared to the other apartment buildings. It would be great to see that fleshed out if this turns into an actual application, perhaps a street view photo simulation. And the setbacks from the streets are looking pretty good. If this were multifamily, you'd think of this as being just a single building. You didn't measure all the setbacks from the streets. Although the setbacks on the individual lots are small, they're still maintaining that buffer from surrounding properties. I think those were all the notes I had.
Robin?
Nothing additional.
That's it?
Nothing additional.
Sure.
Just a couple of comments. One, I guess it's just a philosophy overall, and I haven't been doing this long enough to know what that is, but the trade-off of giving up a commercially zoned property, which is industrial, which the use proposed isn't necessarily highly desirable from what I gather. But there is a trade-off there when you give up commercial zone or industrial zone property to residential in terms of property taxes and also generation of traffic and population and school, burns on schools and blah, blah, blah. We all know that, right? So I don't know what that philosophy is overall for the city. I should know that. Need to know that because I've worked in jurisdictions where that was a huge issue, where there was an avoidance of converting commercial properties to residential for those reasons. So I just throw that out as an overall philosophy of how do we look at that as we look at this rezone. And then overall, though, I am pleased to see single-family housing coming in. The other comments that I have already been made about, the actual product and the mass and those things, so I won't reiterate that. But so there are some positives there, but I think also some trade-offs.
Okay. Well, the city has, in the good old days, drew a line in the sand. No change of commercial property into residential. That flew away a long time ago. That said, this lot is not an industrial lot. It's not a good intended use for the site, even though it's zoned that way. It's not a viable commercial lot. This is an area where there's going to be housing, or the city buys it and creates a giant park or what have you. Or we get the parking lots with Tesla cars. So there's our options. Again, to reiterate, I'm in favor of the single-family housing and willing to give somewhat. I like the idea of the gaps in the facade. That's an excellent comment on Powers as well as the Western Street. Heights, I think the heights can be brought down. The template can be changed. The template, in my mind, saying there's a template is not a fait accompli. The other comment I had, and I'll say it again, is a realignment of the access road from Powers to concentrate our open space. I'm not concerned about the individual lots and the setbacks because of the positioning of the open space around the project mitigates that the minimal setbacks for the individual lots. With that, Bruce?
And I agree with the access road, the reorientation there from off of Powers that you mentioned. But the other thing I was going to suggest, and Sherry, to your point, the Northern facility dates to the 1960s, and I know they've been trying to sell this particular parcel for well over a decade, and nothing, there had not really any takers. So I think the comments, Mark's comment is is accurate, that the truth of the matter is that you're not going to see additional industrial in here. You're not going to, it's off of Broadway, it's off of Littleton Boulevard, it's not a commercial site. And the reality is you're probably looking at highest and best use is probably something along the lines of residential. And I think under the circumstances, single-family residential meets a need that we probably prefer to see, and we can talk about the design attributes and so forth and so on versus multi-family kind of rental properties, which I suggest the community is little appetite for at this juncture. Other than that, the only other comment I would reiterate is that I think it's important as far as the additional materials are concerned. On 10-2-23 sub E sub 3, that the applicant consider information being provided with respect to individual units and the performance of those units post completion of the project. So that would be something I'd like to make sure we keep an eye out for. That's all I've got.
I just looking at this project, recall the previous proposal for storage facility site, which I wasn't real thrilled with when that concept came up, but nonetheless it passed. So I think that this is a great relief to me to not see open storage go in this site. I think that would have been a real mistake for that location. The height I'm not that concerned about. I think the open space and other amenities that the project is going to provide to the neighborhood is a good benefit, and I think it would. The applicant would, if they proceed with this, would benefit if they make a list of specific amenities that this project is going to provide to the city of Littleton. Paved sidewalks, underground utilities, open space, creatively designed and configured on the sites. Those type of things, if that's emphasized in the application, I believe that will be a benefit.
Thank you. Could you bring up the conceptual site plan there?
Thank you for pointing. I was getting ready to ask.
Where's your laser?
I heard people say that shifting this roadway over would, I think, agree that provide a really nice open space through there and allow more amenities to be added. And that's what I wanted to talk about. It's just there's a lot of residential units. There's going to be families there. There's families in the area already. It's kind of an underserved area in terms of parks, in my opinion. So if we could get some other amenities, playground, type park-like, with 50% open space, there should be some opportunities to get some benches and some shade. I love the idea of the xeriscape, bring some native Colorado landscape into there. The idea of screening along the northern edge, I think, was a good catch. So I think it's really close. I think it's a great use of the site. Great improvement on what's there now. I also would just echo the idea that maybe make it a little more uniquely Littleton. Bringing in some materials like brick or something, it might be as simple as that to reflect the character of the neighborhood a little bit more, make it unique from what we have at Littleton Village and elsewhere. You guys stole all my thunder. Some really great comments. I was going to add about the character of the architecture, but you talked about too. So I don't have any further comments. Actually, I'd be curious to see a sun study. How much sun are these? How much sun are the little park and the open areas going to get between the units? Just be curious. But
So,
Bring up one more point nobody's mentioned. The front doors of these units face each other. They create little green courtyards, which is a wonderful place to, grab your paper in the morning, say hi, so you're not just clicking your garage door opener and you never see your neighbor. Probably front porches are at a premium here, but that green space between the front doors of the units is rather nice. I'm sure it'll be taken advantage of. Any other comments? Seeing none. I remember our first P4. I had to prod everybody to say something. Times have changed. Thank you for being forthright. So that's our end of our P4.
Good. So
no other
this will
agenda.
be going to a city council session, study session on February 12th. This is the target date.
Do our comments get put in some kind of form where they can see it, or they have to go watch it on cable, or what?
Not sure what the format is, but it seems like it would be good to have a kind of a summary of your comments for council. I'll see what the protocol is.
Main points. I mean, there's a screening on the north and northern end, the realignment, blah blah blah. But
Sure.
You don't need to talk about move the gutter 6 inches or something.
Yeah, the highlights.
Yeah, the highlights.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of nice to give them something.
Right, and maybe that can be part of our presentation in city council. But I don't know if we include that as something that's with the application. I'm not sure. I'll find out about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else to add?
Sure, not from staff.
Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.